Well, listen. The economist's job is not to create work. It's to remove the need for work. You put economists in charge, they create unemployment at an alarming rate. If you want to create work, then you finance the advertising industry. They're busy making wants and needs that drive people out to work and provide the demand for their labour. And if you want to make those that are unemployed happy as opposed to productive, then you must look to the political system to create an environment in which leisure is a joy and a blessing, not a burden and a fear, a dread and a feeling of hopelessness. You could then use your advertising industry to good purpose, and your economists would be a blessing. But as it is, all three of you are a curse to our society. I speak as an economist and political scientist and someone who has worked in advertising. Thank you, Heavenly Father. So, as you probably already realise, there's nothing in the world that is bad of itself, or good really, but what man makes of it. These skills, being an economist, a specialist in IT, or our technologies like computing and communications and transport and farming and manufacturing are neutral in themselves. They can be generating and generated by good, or they can be generating harm and generated by harm. And it's the same with political systems and economic systems and so on. How they benefit or harm mankind turns on the nature of man. To some extent, they mould man's nature. It's an interactive process. And you can find you're going downhill fast, where the system's making people what makes the system worse. But equally you can have it so that the system is making people that make the system better. I think in some measure democracy is like that. So, you can imagine, can't you, that saints, whether they were in a fascist system, or a communist system, or a capitalist system, or a democratic system, authoritarian or egalitarian, saints will make it good. And the less well-intentioned, rather less so. Almost by definition. It's the case that people tend to mould the activity and the situation in which they're in the longer run, but equally that the situation that they're in tends to mould the people as well. Neither is independent of the other. In my earlier years as an economist, they tended to be socialist, political scientists. Now they tend to be more capitalistic, right-wing orientated. business studies based. The subject may be actually placed in the management school of the institution that they're in, rather than in the social science faculty. Things have shifted, and the character of the economists has similarly shifted, in some measure at least. In earlier decades I could lecture on market failure and 19th and 20th century economic history. Departments tend to have very little interest in such nowadays. In other words, a different understanding is wanted, and therefore application to academia has shifted accordingly. That's in part because the system has been bought by making it subject to market forces rather more than ever it was in the past, and there's great emphasis therefore on huge numbers of students, paying in considerable revenue, of course, by running up debt these days, because it tends not to be provided free by the state. And like other religions, the pursuit of truth has perhaps been pushed aside by a pursuit of doctrine that justifies the status quo in the society in which it's in. So society starts to find it's locked into a system that is not changing in its structure according to need, but holding to a structure that is increasingly inappropriate, outdated, not able to cope with the demands that our modern world, especially our technology and so on, is pressing upon us. Consequently, there's a great call for greater regulation and control, and we use our technology accordingly. Oceans of data that is way beyond our capacity to actually handle. Truth and validity that's completely lost in a market. Abundance of every view under the sun. Lack of integrity, consistency through time as regards to what constitutes the truth, and a general despair that our system is actually beyond our control, and that instead it's controlling us. It's a bit like Marx's assessment of the capitalist system as beyond even the power of the capitalist to put right, as a sort of prophetic utterance for the 21st century. In short, we are the problem, and the political, economic systems that we have are not able to rescue us from our dilemma? Well, that's presenting from a non-spiritual point of view. If, on the other hand, the material world is a classroom that's preparing individuals to know the difference between good and evil, and to gain a preference for the good and an abhorrence of the evil, then of course the world's still functioning very well as regards the lessons that it's giving us. We can experience good and bad in our society, wherever we are in the world, whether it's a very Western type political economy or whether it's otherwise. And we're not looking at the world as something itself to be perfected, but rather an ongoing classroom that has to work well to fashion us according to what our spiritual lack is. And in that regard, the world's working extremely efficiently at the minute as regards numbers. I don't know, what are we up to, 8 or 9 billion, or perhaps more? And they're all experiencing whatever lessons they're experiencing accordingly. And that's pretty varied, probably across the planet, even within any one society. Each of us then is free to pursue what we think is best from our, whatever our present narrow perspective is, and find out the consequences. Our values adjusting accordingly through the passage of time. In other words, if we're looking at fashioning of the individuals, then in some sort of we're free to see the world as a success or a failure according to what our beliefs are as regards its purpose or want of such. And perhaps the want of such view is also very instructive. That if it hasn't got purpose, then life becomes meaningless, and perhaps that generates some of the features of our society that we might see as evil, bad, harmful. But similarly, even if we see the world as having a purpose, or one we've imposed on it, that of it becoming heaven, if you like, a perfect place, and we again learn from our experience of doing that what works and what doesn't, and why it works and why it doesn't. In other words, again, our values start to adjust accordingly. We can visualize a situation, can't we, where the world is so perfect that it doesn't teach us the lessons of evil and the distinction between good and evil behavior as regards its consequences, and whether we should support such or not. And equally a world that was a complete failure in teaching any good at all. Well, can't quite imagine that either, in that I'm not sure as it could exist and still support some sort of physical life. Almost by definition, if it doesn't have any consistency about it, any integrity or stability to support life, then, you know, the life can't exist anyway. And in both extreme cases then, the world loses its function. Well, unless you think there's a shortage in heaven and the earth becoming another addition to such would be good. Perhaps it would be. Unless, of course, there was a need for worlds more like our own that can help the rest of us develop to that treasured state. We're not principally out to change the world. We're out to practice good and avoid evil, and to understand and experience and understand the consequences of such. And the world offers that opportunity. Its actual dramatic improvement of such might offer less such opportunity. But of course it would not be for us to therefore be less concerned to pursue the good. For then we would stunt our own development. In short, the world in a sense is neutral. It's here to do what it does. And if it changed, it would be doing something else, which might be more or less of a blessing, depending on what the needs were. And that's beyond our present thinking, isn't it, given who we are? It's hard to ascribe meaning to life and to existence without some adherence to belief in the existence of God. But if you do have such a belief, then it's hard to suppose that we would fathom the full purpose of such a divine being sufficiently to equally believe in our understanding. In short, we need a natural humility that presupposes the boundary to our understanding in its right place. So I would be left with thanking God for not being sure. Thanking God that we do not know. Thank you, Heavenly Father. Well, the acid test is not in whether, supposing God exists and is, for instance, our Heavenly Father, making us His children, which is some sort of humility vis-a-vis God, but some sort of hopeful estate as regards our future, if not also our present position. It's not to be so persuaded philosophically of the validity of the view, but rather to determine whether having such a view seems to work for the best or not. Does it result in better lives to both those that hold such a view and to others that don't hold such a view? Are people that believe such more helpful to the rest of the planet, or less? And on that turns the validity of the view, not some logical exposition that proves the unprovable. You could say we could be wrong in either case. That's true, but at least we'd be happily wrong in the first. If we found, for instance, that assuming God to exist and to be as a father to us as children, and a very capable, loving father at that, if we found such view tended to increase the happiness both of those that hold it and the rest of the world, well, if we're wrong, what have we lost? At least we practiced being the happier, the more blessed during our lives. And generally it's the pattern, isn't it, that if your children are happy, their future tends to be rather better than if they have a very unhappy childhood. And well, to be casual about it, they grow up warped and twisted. But you know what I mean. Thank you, Heavenly Father.